Dobre utro. That wasn't supposed to be funny. Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Kevin Richardson, and I have been a user experience professional for 27 years now. I'm currently the Director of User Experience at a company called Infragistics in the United States. Our global headquarters is located outside of Princeton, New Jersey. And I want to apologize if my accent is bad. I will try and speak slowly. Where I come from, nobody speaks slowly, everybody speaks quickly, and nobody stops to take a breath. I will slow down. If you would like to reach me after this talk, I am happy to write to anybody about any topic. If you want to talk about user experience, you want to talk about Infragistics, we'll be giving away licenses to one of our tools later on. You can reach me at krichardson@infragistics.com. You can follow me on Twitter at KHR_UX. Louder, yes. Louder I can do. More slowly I can't do. Give me one moment here. Yeah, okay. My talk this morning is about designing a piece of software for use by motorcycle racers. But it's also about the different approaches that we can take as user experience professionals when we redesign software in general. But before I talk about that, I want to spend just a minute talking about data. Businesses today love data. They believe that large sets of data are the key to innovation, to insight, business growth, and they're not wrong. But the key to that success is being able to take actions based on the data. And the problem is that people don't take actions based on data. They take actions based on what the data means, on information, and that's an important distinction. What's necessary is for someone who can take this and translate it into something that's meaningful, to put it into some context, to understand the correlation and the causation, because unless you're a machine, data on its own is useless. The second problem is that businesses don't recognize the first problem. They think that translation actually means visualization. They could not be more wrong. Because what happens when you focus on visualization is that you wind up with stuff like this. This is SAP's Business Intelligence Dashboard from 2015. This is not information. No one from SAP took their data, decided what it would mean, and created this. This is simply a representation of data in visual form, and it does nothing more than make the data more colorful. Modern motorsports racing is a business like any other, and like all those other businesses, they like data too, because for them, data equals speed, speed equals winning, and winning equals money. It even holds true for teams that spend millions of euros each year to collect terabytes worth of data, all with the goal of going just a little bit faster each time they go around the circuit. The same thing holds true for weekend amateur racers like me. This is me. I race motorcycles too, and I love data. So much so that I went out and I bought this little box. This box collects GPS data, and it collects data from the motorcycle engine ECU. And my idea was that the more data I collect, the more I'll know, and the more I know, the faster I can go. It seemed very reasonable. It made total sense to me until I looked at the data I was collecting. I don't collect nearly as much as the professionals, but it is way more than I can handle. It's overwhelming. out of the 20 or so variables that I have access to, I can only focus on 2 or 3 at a time. Because when I see the stuff that I collect, it looks like this. This is my data in a spreadsheet. It's all in there, but I don't know what it means. I can't make sense of it. And because I don't know what it means, I can't use it to take decisions, right? I need it to have some meaning. Luckily, the company that makes that little box also created a piece of software to help me understand what my data means. And this is what that looks like. It is as difficult to use as this screen suggests. And in fact, on this particular screen, there is only one thing I can do. It is a purpose-built screen. You can only take one action. That action is deciding which file to open. That's all you have to do here. Even after I figured that out, what I saw was this. This is the visualization of my data. I have no idea what this means. And when I saw this, I was so angry, like any customer. I just spent money on this thing. I called the company that made the box in their corporate office in Italy to complain. I even offered to redesign this software for them. They were not interested. In fact, they told me there was nothing wrong with this, that people all over the world use this software, nobody has a problem with it, and if it's just a little bit difficult to use, it's because it's very powerful. It has a lot of functionality, as if that's an excuse to make poorly designed software. So I thought, okay, fine. They don't want my help. I will redesign the software just for me. Forget about them. In fact, since there are 3 approaches to redesigning software, I decided to redesign it 3 separate times, one for each, and I want to show you those today. The first time I redesigned it, I focused just on usability. The nice thing about focusing just on usability is you don't really need to know much about the users or why they're using the software. You don't really need to know much about what the functionality of the software is. What you need is a deep understanding of international standards, guidelines, and best practices. So when you look and apply that to the software here, the basic major usability issues surround that less than useful top navigation that has a combination of iconography and text up there. Even on the far right, there's some more of them. This left-hand side list of unsorted variables. The 4 different y-axes on this graph. And these unlabeled thumbnails down at the bottom. Right? I don't need to know how or why people are using it to fix these problems. I know these are problems. So what I did first was I took that unhelpful set of icons and navigation at the top, and I pulled out the things that were truly global features, global functionality, and they're now on the upper right-hand side, things like print and save and open. Down on the bottom right, there are the different visualization options. And up on the top, I took all of the rest of that functionality and I grouped it by similarity so that instead of one long differentiated list across the top, now there are groups of functions based on similarity. That undifferentiated list of variables on the left-hand side, I grouped based on what they measure. And across the bottom, and the y-axis, I removed all but one and hid the other 3 unless the user specifically asks to see it. And then across the bottom, I simply labeled those thumbnails with a lap number and a lap time, because if you look at them, they're all basically the same. This way, if somebody wants to choose one, they have some basis on which to make that decision. As it stands, this is now a more usable version of that application. And sometimes that's the best we can do as UX professionals. We don't get access to the people who use it right? And all we're able to do is kind of treat these symptoms of the disease. But if we do that, there's really no way to understand whether or not the application is useful to anyone. In my next version, I focused just on usefulness. If you're focusing on usefulness, you need to look beyond simple usability problems and understand what users are trying to accomplish when they interact with the application. What are they trying to do? What do they want out of this thing? So to do that, we go off and we do our typical set of research. And in fact, when a client comes to us and says, you know what, I want to hire you to make my application easier to use, what they're really saying is, I want my users to more easily find the stuff they want. And that's fine, right? We're really good at that. Optimizing the interface between the person and the application, that's kind of like our superpower. We'll go out and we'll do our contextual research, we'll conduct user interviews, we'll do contextual inquiries, we'll observe users as they use the application, we'll ask them to describe what they're doing, we'll take notes on the problems that they have. And when you apply that process to our racing application, what you find out is that those folks are looking for answers to some very specific questions. What they're trying to get out of this mess of an interface are some very direct things, like how fast did I go? How far did I lean over when I was in the turn? And did I improve this lap compared to the last lap? That's fine. Once we know these things, we can redesign the application to make these things more obvious or more easy to find and make the application more useful to people. So in the next version, I did exactly that. I used a dark background so that to improve the visibility of the colored lines, since I now knew that people use this thing both indoors and outdoors at the racetrack. I replaced that functional navigation across the top with task-based navigation to make it easier for users to accomplish more common tasks. I included a new way of allowing them to replay and compare one lap to another. And I added this little key performance indicator section to bring the answers to those specific questions right to the front. Since I know people want to know how fast they went and how far they leaned over, I can put that right here for them. I don't need to make them look for it. I can put it right at the front. Okay, this is now more usable and it's more useful. And at this point, we could all walk away happy, right? We would be happy, the client would be happy, the users would be happy. You could go present this at a conference and everybody would be impressed. But I'm telling you here, we can do better than this. We don't often get the time. Clients don't often want us to do better than this, but we can. The next version I would like to show you, I hope, represents innovation. Innovation is that third tier of things that we are, as UX professionals, responsible for when someone hires us to do work. To be innovative, it means improving people's lives in ways they could not ask or imagine for themselves. And to create innovative software means going beyond what people say they want. It means understanding what they need. And I call these needs latent requirements or dormant requirements because users have them, but they don't know that they have them. And let me give you an example, because that sounds weird. 15 years ago, which isn't that long, people like me all walked around carrying 4 different things on their person all the time. Honest to God, somebody must remember this. 4 different things. We carried a small cell phone, we carried a calendar, we carried an address book, and we carried an MP3 player, or if you weren't that cool, a portable CD player to listen to music. And even before that, I guess it was a Sony Walkman. So we carried 4 different devices, and that was fine. Nobody had a problem with that. If some researcher had come up to me and said, you know what, you're carrying a lot of stuff. How can we make this better for you? I would have said, well, you know what, if you could make the batteries last longer, that'd be great. If you could make the CD player or the MP3 player a little bit smaller, that'd be cool. You know, make it weigh a little bit less, that'd be all right. But that was it, right? It was okay. I carried 4 things, no problem. It was Apple who noticed best that what users needed was not the same as what users wanted. Users had the requirement to combine all of these devices into a single object, but they didn't know that, which is why we all now carry a smartphone and not 4 different things. So, to create something that's innovative, what we need to do is look beyond that interaction between the person and the application and see the way that combination of things interacts with other devices, other documentation, other workflows and other processes, even other people and other applications, and even the environment itself. This is where things start to get really interesting for us as designers. This is what separates good design from great design. And as it turns out, what racers want is only a very small fraction of what they actually need. What they need is actually much more subtle, much more complicated, and in fact, oftentimes geographically specific to locations on the racetrack. And interestingly, racers create artifacts like this that they leave behind. Often what we do is much more like sociology or anthropology, where we're sifting through the debris of a foreign culture. Racers are a very foreign culture, and they leave stuff behind them. So this is one of those artifacts. In addition to that, there are recognized sources of published documentation, and there are even educational programs to teach young racers how to hone their craft. When you combine this information with the traditional contextual research that we typically do for projects, what you find out is that racers are looking for answers to much more subtle questions, much more complicated questions than, did I go faster? What they're looking for are answers to questions like, can I decrease the amount of time it takes me to slow down before a particular turn? Can I decrease the amount of time it takes me to get to maximum lean when I'm going through a turn? And can I get through the turn more quickly so that I can get on the gas sooner before the next straightaway? These are much more subtle sorts of things they're looking for. But they're not the sort of things that they were able to tell me when I asked, when you sit down in front of the software, what are you trying to do? It's a very different set of questions. Once I understood the things that these people needed, then I could start focusing on the interaction design itself. And I started by thinking of how to explore different ways of visually representing the answers to those questions. How can I create visual representations of their latent requirements? Once I felt comfortable with the primary visualizations and the interaction models, then I could start thinking about how to combine those things into an interactive prototype, which ultimately I could take out and test. At Infragistics, right, we use this wireframing prototyping tool called Indigo Studio. At the end of the conference, we're going to be giving away licenses to that, so make sure you stick around. That was my commercial. Once I was satisfied with that, then I could start putting this all together into a prototype. For this, I was able to maintain answers to what users needed while not ignoring the sorts of information that they were specifically asking for. And when I created the design, I created a navigational system that moved users from the left-hand side to the right, from general information to more specific information, leading ultimately to the details surrounding the corners. For them, this was most important. The general information around corners I have in a table up at the top, which allows users ease to compare the numerical data while displaying the more detailed corner information as an overlay on a map of the corner itself. Having come this far, I now have a decent prototype that I can take out and test. So I packed up all my stuff and I went back out into the field and I did usability testing and tested for usefulness among a representative sample of the people who typically inhabit racetracks. Racers, people who run small teams, people who run large teams, and crew chiefs. And as it turned out, from a usefulness perspective, it was well received, right? It provided people with information in ways they hadn't thought of, but once they saw it, they said, oh, you know, I never thought of doing it like this. This is really useful. It did require some tweaks to the usability part of the design, to the way people interact with the application, because, not surprisingly, motorcycle racers are not very technically savvy, so I had to kind of scale back what I expected them to be able to do. But all of which is easy based on the results of testing. Once that was done, it was time to start thinking about applying a visual design language to support both the usefulness and the usability. Here, I recruited a friend of mine who is a very talented designer and works for Google in New York City. We decided to maintain that dark monochromatic imagery using a colored data overlay to allow for ease of readability indoors and out. And by allowing users to zoom in and out of the application, we allow them to look at information at different levels of resolution to answer the questions they have in a more natural way. So they can find the answers to, can I decrease the braking distance? Or can I decrease the time to maximum lean? Can I decrease the time it takes me to get out of the corner? By the way, the company that makes the original software still does not care about this. I've tried to show them pictures. They're not interested. You can't teach some people. As satisfying as it was to create, my application will only ever affect the lives of a small handful of very unusual people like me. In the course of your careers, you have the ability to affect the lives of many, many more people than I ever will. What I ask is that when you're designing, you keep this question in mind. Am I giving users what they need? Businesses don't understand why this question is important. Users don't even understand why this question is important. But you and I, we understand why. And it is our responsibility as user experience professionals to bring that innovation into the world. It's our responsibility as professionals to always be giving businesses and users what they need rather than simply what they want. Spasibo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone have questions? Okay, we have first question.
Oh, and
it works.
And I have a hat from Infogistics for the first 3 people who ask questions. If I need to entice you to ask me things.
Kevin, you told us about software vendor of this data who said it's not a problem. They don't have a problem. So how do you think why the vendors, companies, especially for B2B products, don't care about users and especially SAP, IBM, and why do they still make ugly interfaces?
Believe it or not, SAP says they care a lot. And they have, yeah, I know, they're terrible. They're terrible. But I was listening to the guy who was in charge of user experience for SAP just last November, and he says they care a lot and they're making great progress.
They talk a lot.
Yeah, and their progress is very slow if they're making progress at all. For this company, it was a very traditional, old, engineering-based company. And that's a problem today unless the company feels some pain. Their customers cannot use this software. They can't. So what they do is they offer training. They have people whose jobs it is. Somebody will get hurt. They have people whose jobs it is to go out and train users how to use this. The way that we as consultants explain the need for our services to companies like this who don't think they need it is by helping them understand what the cost of that is. There is a cost to an inability to use something, which is easy to figure out. Take those salaries, take the mileage, do the math, and if you don't need to do that training, you save all this money. And we have case studies to back that up where you can take 80 hours of training down to 30 minutes. What's more difficult is trying to get clients to understand that there is more to be gained by looking around the outside of the person-software interaction, looking for those pieces of information, those latent requirements that will lead to innovation. Because clients see that as a distraction. They want you to focus on their software. Don't look at how their software interacts with other software. You don't need to care that the input to this software is a bunch of documentation that is in somebody else's office. Just focus on this. That's what we're paying you for. That's much harder to get people to understand because for a client, they're happy with this much improvement. You and I know that we could give you this much improvement in almost the same amount of time if only you would let us. Okay?
Okay, next question.
Hi, Kevin. I'm Alex. Thanks for the talk. So the question which I have is, what's your vision of how do you balance the need of the business to make money, so things like in-app purchases, for example, and the usefulness? So generally, where does one draw a line between making an application useful and providing the user what he wants and asking for a bit more to pay?
Yeah,
Thank you.
there is a line there, and it's very pragmatic. Usually for us, it's if it doesn't adversely affect what the user needs to accomplish, then fine. When it interferes with the core purpose of the application or the core needs of the user, then we have to say no to things like that. And it's usually not a difficult case to make because we have data, especially if we can do A/B testing or something like that, where we can show if you put this here in the flow, it will disrupt the actions and it will cause X% of people to drop out or X% of revenue to decline. If you put it somewhere else, it won't affect it, or it won't affect it as much. For the sorts of work that I typically do, which are not consumer-facing apps like that, but more internal business software, those questions don't usually come up, but there are always groups of people with their own personal requirements. I want you to make the software do this because I know one person who wants it. Then you have to say, well, you know what? That may not be the best rationale for making everybody else's life worse to improve the life of one.
Okay, next question.
Hello. Thank you very much. And I have a question. Did you develop this stuff?
I am not a developer, but yes, I did partner with a developer, and we do have a working version of this. It's a little bit rough,
Okay.
but it does still work. And I even offered that to the company in Italy and said, look, you're not just buying the designs, I even have the code. They didn't even reply to my email.
Okay, thanks.
Еще вопросы?
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure.
Well done.
First of all, thank you for your speech, and I really loved the interface.
Oh, thank you.
What was the research behind the process, behind the solution you made? How did you find out what the users really wanted from it?
I followed the process as I described it. This was not just me in my office doing it by myself. While I do race motorcycles, I did not use me as the ultimate guide for what should be there. I did research not only with racers, I also did research with of the two pictures of the educational programs. One in the United States is actually global and very, very well known. I interviewed the person who founded that organization. I own those books, so I was able to look at that. And I did spend a couple of weekends at the racetrack. We have a national series in the United States, interviewing those people that I went back later out and tested with, so that I could find not only what people wanted, but what they needed. And I have to admit, I was probably as surprised as anybody else about the shape and the form of the questions people were interested in. Because when presented with a piece of software, you tend only to ask the questions that you think the software can answer. So presented with this mess, I say, well, how fast did I go? Okay, that's probably in there somewhere. Those much more subtle questions only came out when I had people describing to me their process for practicing for a race or for qualifying. How do they know in this particular corner what they need to do to go faster? And then they would show me these pieces of paper that they wrote on. They say, no, for here, in the rain when it's above 15 degrees, I do this so that I remember it, and when it's cloudy out or rainy, I do something slightly different, so I mark it here. So this way, I remember what I'm supposed to do. That was all the stuff that formed the basis of the requirements that I was able to put into the third redesign, so that it became obvious from the data what you were doing and how those actions changed over time and how they affected speed.
Thank you. Коллеги, еще вопросы? У нас, в принципе, есть. Ага.
Well, first of all, thank you very much.
You're welcome. That was too easy. They should throw it.
Yeah, I wanted that one. So the question is, it's 27 years you said you're in the business?
Yeah, I started in 1991.
Yeah. So 27 years is a lot. How do you stay so enthusiastic about it? Yeah, I can see that. I think everybody can see that.
Nobody's ever asked me that question before. But I love what I do. I have known I wanted to do this since before university. I always knew I wanted to help figure out how people do things. Back then, there wasn't really a name for it. It was kind of ergonomics at the time. But today, what helps is being a consultant as opposed to being a UX person in a large company. I work on or am involved with many projects over the course of a year. We don't focus in my company on a specific industry, so we will do projects for farmers, for electron microscopes, for motorcycles, for risk management and stocks and bonds in financial industry, all in the same quarter. So I get to see a lot of different things, and I get to see how a lot of the problems that people have are the same across all of those industries. And interestingly, every single client who ever comes to me tells me, I know that you work on a lot of stuff, but my stuff is different. My stuff is way more complicated than anything you've ever worked on before. It's going to take you a while to figure it out. Everybody says that. The farmer says that. The electron microscope people said that. The racers say that. It is all complicated, yes. It is not very different from one another from a user experience perspective, right? We apply the same process to every industry, to every problem, because it is a general design process. What makes it most interesting is seeing how the application of that process derives results, creates things that are not just easy to use, right? Easy to use is a very low bar. Easy to use is like going into a restaurant and saying, I would like a meal that doesn't make me sick. You should get that. That should not be something you have to ask for. But When we go into a restaurant and say, I want a meal that's going to make me see God, that's what we should be shooting for. We are that kind of restaurant.
Thank you very much. Коллеги, давайте поблагодарим Кевина. У нас закончилось время.
Thank you.
Я прошу